everybody. Last year, when I put out a video about a completely unrelated topic, I got a comment from someone that said, "You're gonna love Baldur's Gate 3. I had planned on playing the game, but honestly, sometimes life just gets in the way. I finally decided as a Christmas gift to myself, and because I needed a little cheering up for the holidays, to pick up a copy and give my first playthrough a whirl. The footage you're seeing is the result of me realizing I was witnessing the final stages of the game's cutscenes at its very end and wanting to capture this moment for posterity. Because it was such a lovely ride, and because my viewers knew me well enough to predict I'd be enjoying myself at this moment, and because it was a massive adventure that I chronicled live on my social media as I was playing it, I do have some notes to share here. It's no longer the season of giving, but then again, what's the harm? I played Baldur's Gate 3, and now I need to talk about it with someone. Before we get to the decisions that I made in my playthrough, I'd like to talk about the combat. In my notes at the very beginning, I said I was impressed with the opening cinematic, but I wasn't immediately hooked by the combat. I always preferred something a bit more similar to the previous Dragon Age games, which is why I was able to get hooked on Neverwinter Nights so easily, which made this game a bit of a harder sell. I had actually picked up and then promptly put down Divinity Original Sin 2 years ago for exactly this reason. Please understand that this isn't a review. I don't really do product reviews, and if I ever upload a video with the word review in its title, it will definitely just be a collection of my thoughts about something and not a score recommending that you do or do not purchase something. I don't actually make those kinds of videos, and there's about 1 million people who do, not to mention even more who produce written reviews that you can take in a whole lot quicker, or who just upload Let's Plays and who give you an impression of what playing a game is like, which is basically what I use as gaming recommendations myself half the time, so it feels to me like everyone and their mother has that market cornered. I just like video games and other forms of art, and I like talking about my thoughts on them and what they mean to me. I don't actually think I hate the turn-based combat. Looking back, I think it felt at times like a whole lot of waiting, but then again, the waiting had its own kind of suspense. I'm glad I played this game even for that. I think it was a valuable experience, even if it was a bit frustrating at times. Larian Studios knew what to make more than I knew what I wanted to play. Sometimes the customer is wrong in matters of taste. Sometimes the player knows whether they're having fun, but not why, or what should be done about it. Sometimes fun isn't the whole point. If all games were like Overwatch or Marvel Rivals, which sounds like hell by the way, so let's not do that, then maybe the priority on immediate fun enjoyment would make sense. But I remember weeping endlessly over the ending to Life is Strange the first time I beat it, and I don't know if fun would be the word I'd use for that game. In fact, I actually replayed the last chapter with my roommate Rich, sitting next to me for emotional support, because it was just too upsetting to replay it alone. Is the combat in Baldur's Gate 3 fun? I kinda don't care. It hits, and it's an experience I like, is how I would describe it. And that's close enough for government work. One thing I did miss a bit of was the micromanagement character switching speed and time advance features of Dragon Age Inquisition, which make combat in that game feel both fast and tactical. I'm not entirely sure it would work in Baldur's Gate 3, but it probably works in Inquisition, because encounters in Inquisition are designed to be able to be navigated in that way, as well as casually in real time without any micromanaging at all. So maybe one day when we get a Baldur's Gate 4, we could see something different. It may not be what I like best, but the combat in Baldur's Gate 3 is just about the best it could be, and while that might seem like an eye-rollingly obvious take, I genuinely cannot believe I am writing these words as I type them. Me, enjoying turn-based combat? It's more likely than you think. I didn't have much to say about the companions to begin with, except that it took me a long time to find Gale, since I had skipped him on accident. I got lae'zel and Shadowheart and Astarion pretty quickly, but none of them impressed me at first. I was determined to find someone cool. Eventually I ran into Will, and I liked the cut of his jib, so I ended up traveling with him a lot. I also found Karlach much later and fell in love with her immediately, so I talked Will out of killing her, and after I met Gale I had everybody. Or so I thought. See, it turns out you can actually get other companions in this game. I'm aware of 3 at least, Minthara, Jaheira, and Minsk, who are quite popular among different sections of the fandom for various reasons, but I didn't recruit them for all basically the same reason. I did, however, pick up a 4th. Halsin is a druid who can turn into a bear, and he's connected to this quest you have to do to save this druidic grove from some goblins. I wanted to help everybody there since there's tieflings there and Karlach is a tiefling, and since I was a druid for my first playthrough, and thus felt a connection to the grove and its plight. After a lot of trial and error, I figured out about jumping and sneaking, and managed to make my way through the goblin camp. I slowly, over days and days of trying, killed everybody there except Halsin, Volo, and some dude who was being tortured. Volo, it turns out, can travel with you, so along with all the animal friends I could find, I ended up getting him in my camp and was genuinely enjoying myself. Halsin is a bit of a meme character, but because he's an archdruid, I felt like my character would admire him. He's got this whole story about how you need to help heal a kid and save a big shadowy place from a curse, which leads to him telling you where to go. So I advanced on underground to a place I was passingly familiar with by reputation, called the Underdark. I went underground and was promptly killed by some beholder-looking thing. I snuck around a bunch more and got killed by a castle. Then I slowly worked my way through different groups of characters who, as it turned out, could be reasoned with, like some dwarves and some mushroom people. And I finally got to this area where some gnome slaves were being worked to death by the dwarves. This initiated the no good, very bad time of resetting and save scumming my way through what has to be, under better circumstances, an eminently doable fight with an elf named Nier. My issues were threefold. I was underleveled, I had glitched the dialogue where you can get the dwarves to help you, and I did not grasp the nuances of the combat. I did, however, manage to take out some of the baddies with a sneaky Asterion and a little trusty Karlach rage. Also barrels. So many barrels. It was honestly disgusting how many barrels I managed to scrape together and how I set them up along the perimeter of the area where the cutscene with Nier triggered. I killed Nier before getting the cutscene, but the game still acted like he kicked that one gnome girl into the lava anyway, which is kind of bullshit, but whatever. It was the hardest fight I had been through, bar none. Well, okay, hardest fight I had been through so far. I headed out into the Shadowlands, which is where Halsin wanted us to go, and pretty quick I wound up meeting Jaheira. Some tieflings had also gotten that far, and since I was romancing Karlach by this point, I obviously wanted to get the last upgrade for her heart, which was when I found out she was dying. This would proceed to weigh on my every decision and triumph for the remainder of the run. I also immediately proceeded, after acquiring this information, to speak with Isabel, triggering a cutscene where she was kidnapped and where everyone but my team and Jaheira died. I didn't mention it earlier, but I had killed Minthara when I met her. I figured out at a certain point that she can become a companion. You have to get her after you meet Ketheric Thorm, who rocks, by the way, and is my favorite villain in the game. You can save her when you save the gnomes and tieflings in the tower. I wasn't bothered by losing Minthara at first, but the more I've learned about her since, the more it bothers me that I just killed her like that. After you save her, you can head to the Gauntlet of Shar, which of course I did anyway. The Leap of Faith test was extremely trying, and that Balthasar guy was a dick, who I just pushed off the ledge because I couldn't be bothered after dying once in his fight. Jaheira can also become a companion, but she didn't because after I rescued Dame Aelin from the Gauntlet of Shar, I headed into the tower and avoided the big fight because I had either gotten everyone who could have helped me killed, or avoided doing quests that could have softened up the enemies. It was just my squad and Jaheira, and Ketheric Thorm just straight up killed her, and I could not revive her. It turns out Isabel also permanently dies if she gets captured, so by this point I was kind of feeling like I was getting every good or interesting person I met killed, which is not what I wanted for Christmas. I did the big fight with Merkel, which was super dope, and barely got it. This was around the time that I started getting the combat down, but I had to stress I was barely level 7 by this point. I had skipped a ton of quests, including the whole section in the mountains, and did not go back at any point to do any of it, although I had done some good stuff like helping various gnomes here and there. So many gnomes. Luckily, the third act with the city has a lot of experience, but it was pretty challenging at first. Having started to figure the combat out, I also played around with respeccing my characters a bit, and found good stat alignments and equipment. I loved that date scene with Karlach where she pretends to have just met you, and since she had carried me through a lot of fights earlier, I was basically bringing her everywhere like a jolly red giant or a glowing golden retriever. I pictured my Tav riding on her shoulders through the streets of Baldur's Gate. Ride wife. Life good. Catching up on the gang, I had helped Halsin with his quest, and his content mostly ended, with the exception of him being a helpful friend for the rest of the game. Will had been punished for allowing Karlach to live, but then rewarded for helping Mizora, which ironically I had Karlach do, and then punished again for no reason and forced to sacrifice his father, and then rewarded again in the most indirect and ultimately inconsequential way, as Mizora said she would help me in the endgame, and then promptly no-showed. I did, however, have Volo, the Gur vampire hunters, the weird ox, the city guard, Nine Fingers Keen and her guild, as well as Dame Aelin, most of which seemed not to matter, because I got a glitch where after beating the first fight in the final mission, most of them automatically turned hostile for seemingly no reason, which only increased my feelings of sadness as I had to kill all of them, except Aelin and the ox. I ended up doing this pretty tough but also funny quest with the goofy and annoying wizard, where I stopped him from imprisoning Dame Aelin, and then I stole one of his books and gave it to Gale. This seemed to displease his catbird friend, but ultimately I didn't think much of it since he wanted it so bad. Hypocritically, I stopped Asterion from ascending as a vampire. This was more so because there was a very direct human or vampire cost to it, and because it made killing his vampire master feel more cathartic to me, but also because Asterion is kind of a jerk. I really did not like this guy for the first 2 acts of the game. He blossoms a ton in the 3rd act, but when he tried to bite me in my sleep, I had spared him and even let him drink my blood. Apparently if you don't stop him, he just kills you. That kinda soured me on him, but I pledged to do a playthrough where I romance him just to see how his story plays out. I liked how nuanced his character was though, so it's cool that there's something deeper going on there, and that he has a lot of endgame content. Because I had totally skipped almost all of the Githyanki content, lae'zel was basically irrelevant to the 3rd act, and at one point she even got kidnapped by Orin, which happened sooner than you might think, since I forgot to go back and talk to Gortash until way later in the game, and so I allied with Orin first, which involves her taking a captive from the camp. Sadly, lae'zel then went back to Vlaakith, which makes her yet another companion in my first playthrough who got a sad ending. I killed Minsk at a certain point while doing the Nine Fingers quests. I don't have much to say about it other than that he was not overly reasonable with me, given that the real Jaheira had not made it out of Moonrise Tower alive. Last but certainly not least, Shadowheart really grew on me, and quite quickly at that. I almost romanced her, and probably would have if Karlach wasn't there. I loved how much content there was related to her. She really felt like not just an Act 3 character, but also an Act 2 and Act 1 character as well. One of my sleeper picks for best written character in this game for sure. I made my dream visitor super cute in the beginning, and was astonished to learn she was a mind flayer. I actually liked and trusted the Emperor a lot, and ended up doing basically everything he said, with no deviations until he completely delivered on all of his promises. Having a character like that be the most honest person in the game, besides maybe a couple of your main companions, was a huge breath of fresh air, and the option to romance him was pretty intriguing, although he came onto me super quickly, probably because I was crushing on him when I thought he was literally the girl of my dreams. Not that I'm shallow or anything, but it was kind of hard to see past the complete change of gender, big brainy tentacle face, and total lack of a soul. Still, for a literal soulless manipulator, he seems like a really swell guy, and I'm super sold on the Baldur connection, and how he connects to Answer. That was a really tough fight, but so worth it for the story implications. The final fight had me feeling totally unqualified, since the Nautiloids raining fire really complicate things, and the fact that the giant brain can destroy the ground out from under your feet completely screwed me over, and meant that I had to try for a whole other 5th attempt just to get that far, and then I barely got the win. Normal difficulty might have been a bit much for me starting out, but overall there was nothing more satisfying than seeing that thing crash and burn, and having my companions commentate over it. Asterion became a humanitarian, Gale became a god, Halsin went back to his grove, Volo got to write another book, Shadowheart became an adventurer who still writes to her lesbian lover, we love that for them, and Will and Karlach escaped with me to Avernus. We all came back to this great party at the end of everything, and it was really something to be able to bask in the pure joy of it all. Even Scratch and the Owlbear Cub were there. I sort of wished Minthara, Jaheira, and Minsk had made it, or that Nine Fingers Keen and Dame Aelin had been able to be there, but it was still such a cool moment. I was sitting there absolutely glued to the screen, just taking in the beauty of the whole situation. I also didn't really expect Withers to be that cool when I first met him, but by the end he really figures into the story, doesn't he? I figured out only at that point just how important he was, and it felt like he had been guiding me the whole way, which was really nice. This playthrough might have been an absolute tragedy fest at times, but I'm so glad I played Baldur's Gate 3. There's truly nothing like it, is there? Now to go back to Divinity 2, but maybe after a few more playthroughs of Baldur's Gate 3.